here. Karen Greenberg is the author of Rogue Justice, a book, and we wanted to note for you in advance because she's very cool and very sort of underexposed here in DC, and it's a great thing to have you here, that you're going to be signing your books for those of you who want them after. So if she really wins you over in this conversation, they're going to be there after. But let me start for a moment and ask, we're thinking 15 years, what has happened? And a lot of our discussion this morning has focused a little bit on the getting the bad guys, the security, the dimensions. And I'm interested in what the state of our soul is. Part of the equation was targeted killings, rendition, drones, a whole new infrastructure of dealing with detainees in Guantanamo. And Karen, I want to ask you, in the waves of fear that drove a lot of decisions on how we deal with people we identified as enemies, whether they were or not, what is the state, what is the price we've paid as a society for that?
Big. The price we've paid is much more than we can imagine, I think. And I can talk about this a little bit. There are things that we now accept as a country that we never would have accepted on September 10th, 2001, 15 years ago. The most obvious, the low-hanging fruit, is, of course, torture, which is still mentioned in presidential debates of the candidates, which came to an end before the end of the Bush administration and, definitively with the Obama administration. But let me just mention a couple other things. One is the concept of indefinite detention, being able to be held without trial, without a sense of end of hostility, so you're just kept in limbo. Prior to 9/11, this is not something that would have been tolerated within the American legal or constitutional mindset. Now what we've done is President Obama has said, let's close Guantanamo. But closing Guantanamo does not mean what it used to mean. It used to mean ending indefinite detention, which is what Guantanamo is about. Now it means closing the doors on Guantanamo and keeping a couple dozen people in indefinite detention, which is also keeping a category of indefinite detention alive within the American mindset and legal system. So that would be another.
Let me open this up to Hina as well, but I would argue that if you went out to poll the American public, and I could be wrong on this, that might not seem like a bad thing, that they may not be aware or think about the consequences. So is this just Karen Greenberg being an obsessive compulsive about an issue that Americans have sort of lost track of and doesn't matter anymore? Why, when we did see horrific things happen, we have seen beheadings, we have seen horrific human rights abuses abroad, and we've seen terrorism directed at the United States. I guess my question is, so what? I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of myself, but on behalf of many people I know and around the country. How's that?
Okay, so here's why. Here's the answer to that. Yeah, that's 24 people. We don't care about them. We're over it. We understand the cause of 9/11. That's one thing. But there's such a thing as mission creep. And who we define as an enemy and who we can detain under those circumstances could change at any moment. This is not a legal principle that's been codified, that's been voted upon, that we accept as part of our body politic. That's why we're keeping them in Guantanamo, one of the reasons. And so if you really think that you can contain this, that's one thing. But we don't have that guarantee.
Let me jump in here, Steve, if I can, which is part of the answer to the so what. So 5 years ago, in the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, we wrote a report at the ACLU, and it was called A Call to Courage. And it was essentially a call to courage on the part of our policymakers and national leaders to remember that resilience and a form of strength that comes from the Constitution and values embodied there are written into our formative national character, and we were in danger of losing that. And I think we're still on that trajectory. So part of the so what, part of the are we safer, is to remember that one of the things we're looking for safety for and from, in addition to the undeniable risk and threat of terrorism, is safety from government overreach, safety from government violations of the law. And there is a system, obviously, of structural checks and balances written into the Constitution, as well as the framers' formation of the Bill of Rights, right? Fourth Amendment essentially says, basic principle, government does not surveil us unless there's actually suspicion of wrongdoing in advance. Fifth Amendment, due process rights. And I think that system is in danger of continuing to be broken down. It has been violated. Let me give you a couple of examples. 2001 AUMF, right? Specific language of the 2001 AUMF, debates when Congress passed it, rejected wholesale authority on the part of the executive to go to war without defining a particular enemy. Now, two administrations, Republican and Democratic, have used and invoked the 2001 AUMF beyond its purpose and beyond its breaking point.
Right.
And that's a failure of structural checks and balances with respect to perhaps the most important power that Congress should have, which is the power to declare war. Now, this is not just a post-9/11 failure. That failure has been happening for a while. But I think one of the dangers, and this comes back to, for example, the targeted killing policy, is that based on that 2001 AUMF, you've had first President Bush, now 2 terms of President Obama, claim the authority to engage in massive legal strikes in violation of the international legal framework that the United States helped establish that maintains international peace and security, picking from bits and pieces of the most permissive aspects of the law while ignoring the restrictive aspects that protect the right to life, as well as security.
But Hina, I have heard, I was there when the president gave his speech, essentially, you know, my short form would be "Stop me before I kill again," was a National Defense University speech where he basically said, our targeted killings policy needs review, needs controls, needs standards, needs frames, and called on Congress to help work with him to set those frames. This was a president inviting some sort of framework to manage the decisions that he and John Brennan and others had been making. That hasn't, I mean, the call happened, but to my knowledge, the framework building hasn't happened because you have a Congress that seems unable to work forward. And I'm interested because I understand and appreciate the frame you're coming at on this, but the fact is targeted killings are continuing, but the President of the United States, Obama, seems to me anyway to be trying to navigate something that isn't just completely disconnected from legitimacy.
Yeah,
Am I wrong?
You know, it's one thing to say it, and another thing to do it, and another thing to blame politics, which is often happens in this administration. It's politically, I try, but I can't.
So what grade would you give them on these issues, Karen?
But I just want to talk about something. You asked about the soul of our soul. You know, we now have executive killing without any kind of transparent process. We have warrantless surveillance, you know, which we're trying to work back from, but this has been a policy, right? That is, and we have group surveillance as opposed to individual, you know, suspicion.
A lot of the warrantless surveillance has been walked back.
It has been walked back,
Some
but
of it
there's
has
still
been walked back.
there's still discussion of it. And this idea that you target a group, whatever that group is, rather than the individual, is so contrary to how we think about the founding of the country. We have executive detention, which you've already talked about. So how would I rate this president? You know, I could rate his intentions, right? His intentions are pretty good. And I'd give him maybe a B+, you know? But his ability to achieve what he wanted to do is probably a B-. Let me just say that one place that I think
he might be very happy with a B-.
He might be.
Yeah.
But one place that he hasn't succeeded is on the surveillance issue. I think he may have been convinced that it was better to follow along the trend that had happened, but this is a place where he has really, but he tried, and so I just want to talk about this. The reason, as far as I can tell, that they pushed back on surveillance was not because of civil liberties concerns, any more than the reason we ended torture was civil liberties concerns. It was because there was a large contingent within Washington writing reports and other things that said, basically, this is not making us safer. This program doesn't work. So the Patriot Act sunsetted. Yeah, it was illegal, according to the court, but it was because it didn't make us safer. And so this is something that Obama has not really explained to the American people well. And I think, you know, that's another piece of it. A final piece is, could we please have a president or any leader who gets up and says, guess what? We are safe. We are safer. We have spent trillions of dollars on a military, intelligence, law enforcement, and we know what we're doing. Well, so on that, he gets a very low grade.
Hina, let me ask you a bifurcated question. On one hand, president just announced his appointment of a Muslim federal judge, first time.
Yeah.
But to talk about Muslims in the climate 15 years after 9/11 and the demeaning terms that they've been talked about in this election, I'm just wondering how the ACLU in your world sees that, how you communicate. But while you do that, I'm also interested in just a quick reflection on looking back at the last 15 years, and I don't mean this in any disrespectful way. Had there been mistakes or blind spots in the kind of human rights, global justice community of things that you just got wrong, that you overemphasized, that actually those on the security side of the equation were right? So let me start with those two things real quickly.
Two things he says, and then he says quickly.
Yeah.
So let me talk about not just the politics then. I think the first part of your question goes not just to the politics of fear, but also to the politics of bigotry, which I think we're seeing at unprecedented crescendo levels in this election now. And there's an entire extreme set of proposals and policy proposals coming from Donald Trump. But I think it's also necessary to point out where we have been on some of those kinds of issues, both under the Bush administration and under the Obama administration. So if you all will remember, going back to just a few days after 9/11, where President Bush visited a mosque and he said, we're not going to hold the many responsible for the terrible bad acts of a few. And then, of course, his administration went on to do exactly that with sweeps and detention and prosecutions and so on. And something perhaps not as dire, but somewhat similar is going on still today. So I give President Obama credit, I give Hillary Clinton credit for calling out extreme forms of bigotry, yet we still have programs, for example, countering violent extremism programs that, despite the words used about being about extremism of all kind, still do that fundamental sin, which is to look at an entire community through the bad acts of, fortunately, a tiny few, through a security lens, and that is counterproductive, it's ineffective, and it's just dividing us further in ways that I see playing out all the time in communities with which I work and with which we work. And but you've got to link that also to other kinds of programs that focus the eye of the security state unfairly in ways that are challenging. So let me give you just one more example.
Really quickly.
Watch lists, right? In our litigation seeking a fair redress process for the no-fly list, the government admitted that it is blacklisting people and preventing them from exercising their constitutionally protected rights based on predictions that people who have never even been charged with a crime might nevertheless do something wrong in the future.
Because of name and race, or?
We found in our work it's been disproportionately against minorities, Arab American, South Asian minorities. Now, if you're going to do something that perilous, right, if you're going to do something that remarkable, you have to provide a fair process for people to clear their names of something they might never do, and that the government still refuses to do. So I think, very quickly touching on the second part of your question, what did we get wrong, or what perhaps did we not anticipate? I know that I didn't anticipate the ways in which the system of checks and balances would break down as badly as it has. And I'm talking not just about Congress, but I'm talking also about the courts. In terms of, not pushing back as much as they could have on things like transparency. We talked about targeted killing earlier. There are over 100 legal memos that have been written to justify the lethal force program, of which only about 3 or 4 have been made public, right? So that system of checks and balances failed. And I think another area is one that I've struggled with a significant amount over the course of my years of work on this. It struck me when I was down at Guantanamo. It strikes me when I'm doing all of this work. It's something that Senator McCain said. And early on in the discourse post 9/11, it's not about them, it's about us, right? And in advocacy, pretty much that was the only thing that was working, including in the torture debate. It's not about them, those bad guys. It's about us and our values. But I think part of what that ended up doing is dehumanizing people who are part of us and creating a division between us and them that I think is really detrimental both to rights and to security and the fabric of what this great national project is in this country.
Thank you. Karen, let me ask you to briefly share with me, as you look back over the last 15 years, you've been one of the most prolific writers on this question of rights and the sort of national soul, and looking at it's like my poli-sci professor used to say, you don't know a society unless you watch it and observe it under stress. What mistakes has your community, if I can give you the leadership of the rights community, what mistakes have you made? What would you do differently in short form?
I would focus. I think there is one mistake, and I think it's an overall conception that we got into the debate that there was liberty and there was security. And there were a lot of people who said, oh, really, they're the same thing. And so that debate just went away and never had it. The fact is that human rights people and civil libertarians need to appreciate more than they do, at least articulating it to the public, what it means to carry the burden of national security. Right, this is a good example right now. We have a counter-violent extremism program that DHS and DOJ are rolling out, and there are many in the human rights community, the civil liberties community, who don't want anything to do with it. It's the government, but actually, if you look at what they're asking for, they are asking for ideas. This is not a cynical attempt to get people to think about how do we stop extremism. Who cares what we call it, whether we call it violent extremism? I understand, who cares and why. But there has to be more of a shared sense that, okay, there are some national security realities that we need to think about. And I think just giving a little bit in that direction could make everybody should be able to sit at the same table, as you and I know, and talk about these things. So that's my
Thank you both so much. Let me now go to the floor. Do you still have a question? In the back, young lady? No? I guess hand is not. So, anyone? Yes, right here. Tara McKelvey. Very smart reporter with the BBC.
Hi, I wanted to ask you, I liked what you said, Steve, about the Stop Me Before I Kill Again speech by Obama. And I wondered if you could tell me about what it means for a liberal to become the drone president, and whether liberals should have known before that he was going to do that, or whether he learned something when he went into office.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What does it mean for liberals that President Obama will hereto be known as the drone president? Hina?
I think, I work for a nonpartisan organization, so I'm going to put aside the liberal or whatever
just
other
talk
label.
completely fact-based and empirically.
Fact-based and empirically, I think this is a deep retrenchment, and I think it is a very dangerous one. And I think when you're thinking about these things, replace President Obama with President Clinton, President Trump, President Romney. Because one of the ways in which the Obama administration sought to put constraints over the executive branch's claimed authority in the so-called targeted killing program was when it looked like President Romney might become sort of president, right? And look at where we are now. So when you're asking about what does it mean for this president to have done it, it means something very dangerous in that the next president, whoever she or he may be, the next country, which might have far less of a record of trying to have rights-respecting approaches, is going to claim this exact same legal authority. And what is that legal authority? It is the legal authority claimed to declare people, including your own citizens, enemies of the state without geographic or temporal limitation, without judicial review, based on executive branch say-so alone. And that is a very dangerous authority, no matter the party or the political perspective of the individual who is commander-in-chief.
And one that other countries may also have the power to do in a way that we don't think of this as a reciprocal relationship right now, but that could evolve sooner than we think.
And just to wrap up, Karen, and give you the last word, as you look forward, in 6 months we're going to have a new president of the United States. Do you see any of the issues you work on getting better in whatever options may be coming next? And I mean, other than Jill Stein.
I don't think the surveillance issue, which I think is the greatest overreach of this war on terror, is going to reverse in any way for the foreseeable future. I do think there's a possibility Guantanamo will close. I think if it closes, the idea of this kind of detention is over. But I think there's going to be some new challenges that have to do with the fact that state actors are back on the scene, not just non-state actors. And the new challenge is having a national security policy that can actually deal with both things in an integrated way.
Thank you for this conversation. Hina Shamsi, Director of the National Security Project of the American Civil Liberties Union, and Karen Greenberg, Director of the Center on National Security at Fordham University School of Law and author of Rogue Justice, which you can now buy outside if you'd like Karen to sign a copy of yours. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.